Continuing our walk through the Bible in the book of Genesis, one of the things that we talk about during this time is just kind of give you a review, is we see this journey in the Bible, and we kind of look at the Bible in 4 stages. I mean, there's so many different stages, so many different things, but we try to just look at the initial 4 stages. Creation stage, when God created everything and he created perfect. Then we would also talk about not only the creation stage, but the fall, when mankind sinned, and it damaged everything. It brought an effect upon everything that God had created. Then we realized God made a promise of redemption. And the biggest part of our Bible is that redemption story unfolding. That's what we see through all of it. And then we would find at the very end, God's going to restore all things. And he's going to make everything as it was in the beginning, in a sense. He's going to do away with all of the curse. And so we have those things. Part of this idea also is that we were created to image God. Part of our purpose in life, part of our understanding of what a Christian is when God created mankind, he created them, and he said, let us make them in our image. And that really gives the idea that we would rule under his authority, but we would reflect his image. So that when people encounter you and they encounter me, they would be seeing what God is like. That's why Jesus said, if any man has seen me, he has seen the Father. But sin damaged that. It really changed everything, and that image of God began to be distorted, and no longer were people seeing what God was like. As a matter of fact, sin began to fill the earth. And we come to Abraham and his call and his purpose. What Adam had failed to do in imaging God had resulted in sin and the image of God being distorted, filling the earth. And so God, in his plan, has decided he's going to continue to call people who will be his image bearers. And we'll continue to see that fail until there's one successful person, that's Jesus Christ. But one of those people that God's working in and working through is Abraham. And you'll see him as Abram to this part because his name hasn't been changed yet. He's about 2,000 years after Adam, or after creation. And through those 2,000 years, mankind has just filled the earth with anything that's not the image of God, the very opposite. Sin, wickedness, violence, corruption, immorality. It's filling the earth when God's goal was to have the earth filled with his image. Through Abram, God calls this person to start filling the earth again with his image. He's going to work through a people. That nation that's going to come from him, the nation of Israel's purpose, was to worship God and obey his rules and see that they would be blessed. And what they're doing is they're supposed to be imaging God to the other nations. And they lost sight of that. But Abram, when he was called, God had called him to do some big things by steps of faith. Remember, Abraham actually grew up in a home and in a country that worshiped idols. He doesn't grow up in Sunday school. He doesn't grow up serving God. He has to walk away from false religions to serve the true God. And God had called him to leave his country, to leave behind his false idols, to leave behind his family, and to follow God to an undisclosed location. That's a lot of faith. He called him to trust God to provide and replace everything that he was walking away from. I was speaking to someone this past week, and that's kind of where they're getting to in life, is realizing if I'm going to go forward in salvation, if I'm going to trust God, I've got to walk away from a life, the only life I've ever known. And that's huge. And so as we see that, Moses has a goal as he's writing this. Remember, Moses is recording these things for the nation of Israel. He wants them, as they're going into the promised land, to look at what God's already done here and to give them sort of a history. Abraham is their forefather. He's where they all came from. And he's going to kind of teach him a couple of things. He wants to teach them, first of all, follow Abraham's faith, but don't follow his mistakes. Isn't that the goal of a lot of parents? Let me tell you what I did right. Do that. But don't do the things I did wrong. I remember my dad was a smoker pretty much all of his life. Up until he had his stroke, was in the nursing home. It was the only time he never asked for a cigarette. My dad was a serious smoker. He was in the hospital from a heart attack, and him and his roommate almost got kicked out for smoking. So you kind of understand he was a pretty serious smoker. I remember my dad telling me when he started smoking and he wished he had never started smoking. And as a young person, I remember him telling me, don't start smoking. Don't do what I did. Don't end up like me where you get something in your life you can't put down. I remember that. So even though I would see my dad smoking, and I would remember that's not what he wants to do. That's not the life that he wants. And he was very upfront about that. So now we come to a place where we start talking about learning from Abraham's mistakes as well as his successes. And we're going to learn to walk by faith and not by sight. And we've talked about this before, and it's going to be a theme throughout the book of Genesis. Matter of fact, it's a theme throughout the Bible as a whole. Well, let's take a look at some of the things that we talk about. I call it an imperfect faith. Now, we've recently learned that Abraham, he's called the father of all who believe. And we kind of learned, if you remember this one, if this is Abraham's faith, what's our faith supposed to look like? It's supposed to look like his. It should match up to his. We do know that means in the best part of his faith. Because Abraham's faith was imperfect, so we don't want to follow his mistakes. We learn that through his mistakes, we can make better decisions. So I want to ask you a question just to think about for a second. Have you ever learned, don't answer it and don't point to them, have you ever learned from someone else's mistakes? I have. You watch them, you see them, maybe they taught you, just like I just told you about my dad. We learn from people's successes, we learn from their mistakes. And here's a neat thing about the Bible includes both. God includes our heroes there in their faith, but he also includes their mistakes. Because he knows that we learn as much or more through their mistakes as we do through their successes. And one of the mistakes that Abraham's going to make is that he's going to stop walking by faith and walk by fear. He's going to let fear guide his decisions in something very important, and it's going to cause catastrophic consequences. It's amazing to me that we've watched Abraham leave behind so much stuff, right? And we've watched Abraham come to this place where he realizes, if I'm going to follow God, I've got to make big steps, and I've got to trust him by faith. So Abraham does that, doesn't he? And it's amazing. We see that. And we see people in our lives sometimes that we go, you know what, I love their faith. They encourage me. But then we see Abraham let fear come in. And fear leads him to make a decision without prayer, seemingly. And a decision that's about to cost him everything. So let's take a look at it. We'll start in verse number 10 of chapter 12. Genesis 10, verse number 12. Genesis 12, verse 10. And there was a what in the land? And Abram went down into Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was grievous in the land. This is an unexpected crisis in Abraham's life. An unexpected, is what I call it, an unexpected crisis. I want to paint the picture for you, and I want you to kind of get into Abraham's way of thinking. Because sometimes we do need to sympathize with the people in the Bible that make mistakes. Abraham has left everything, and he's trusting God to do what? To replace everything that he left. To replace it with his blessings and his protection. He follows God to a place he doesn't even know where he's going. When he gets there, the Canaanites are in the land. But what does Abraham do? We saw last week he built altars. He proclaimed the name of God. He's boldly telling people that he's serving this one and true God. He's done everything by faith. What would we expect, having not grown up and learned it? Reading it for the first time, what do you expect to see happen to Abraham behind that? Blessings. Right? I mean, just you're expecting to see him just prosper and for all the problems in his life to just kind of get ironed out right away. You know, just the mountains be moved, right? I mean, just the blessings flow. That's what we would expect to see in his life. You know why? Because that's what we also expect to see in our life. God, I did this, and now look at my life. God, I trusted you, and I gave here. I trusted you, and I walked away from this, and I expected all of these things to go smoothly. And God, it's a lot of problems. I've been talking to a person recently, and they're making some big strides in their life, and they sent me a text. It did not surprise me at all. It's something along this line. This has been one of the hardest weeks of my life. Nothing has gone right. We just want to say, Lord, they're trying to take these steps towards you. Could you just show them how you just make everything great? Why did it not surprise me? Because that's been my experience, and it's been an experience with so many different people that we see taking steps to follow God. And it can be discouraging. Abraham gets here, there's an unexpected crisis. Instead of everything being great, there's a famine in the land. And you have to picture that Abraham is responsible for hundreds of people. And there's a famine. It's in the land. Where's the land? The place where God had directed him to go. But what did the Bible tell us that Abraham did? He went to Egypt. Why did he go to Egypt? Egypt always had plenty. Why? There was that river that went through there, that Nile River that seemed to flourish things. Egypt rarely experienced famines in the way that Canaan did. It was the normal thing to do. It was the rational thing to do. But we never read that Abraham prayed to do it. We never read that God directed him to do it. He said, well, maybe that's irrelevant. Maybe that's not part of it. And maybe you're right. Maybe we're just reading too much into it. But when we look at things that happen, there's a few other things that stand out. In Egypt, we never read about Abraham building an altar or calling on the name of the Lord. And going into Egypt comes another problem that Abraham foresees and makes a decision about that sounds logical and rational, but it's led by fear. I want you to really get the difference of walking by faith and walking by fear. Faith says, I do not know how this will work out, but I believe this, I know this is what God said, so I'm going to trust God to do it. Fear says, if this is going to work out, I'm going to have to do this. Fear says, I have to take care of myself. Fear says, I have to protect myself. Faith says, God has to protect me. God has to take care of me. And so as we look at that, naturally we would expect to read that everything worked out, but we find this famine in this land, this unexpected crisis that comes. And we want to go back and learn more about walking by faith and seeing what happens. When the food ran out, he goes to Egypt. Egypt is the logical explanation. But in this story, everything begins to shift, and everything that we know about Abraham, we start to question a little bit because he makes some decisions that cause us to kind of worry about his faith. But here's the spoiler alert. He ends up back in Canaan at an altar, worshiping God and walking by faith again. So I just want to, in case anyone's all worried about that, I want to make sure you get to that part. So as we see that, he does what many of us would do. He goes in and he makes a decision that he's going to not walk by faith, but by fear. Let's give a verse of scripture that we say a lot of times, but sometimes it's best when we learn to put it into actual practice or into application. Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 and 6. Can you say this? Let's read this together. Trust in the Lord and lean not into in all thy ways, and he shall. In everything that we do. Here's the issue that we have as Christians. I have it, you have it, everyone you meet has it. We know to trust God for the big things. But the Bible says trust him in all things. And it says to acknowledge him in all things. So once we get a little bit of experience in life, we start to make decisions based off of our experience and not off of asking God, should I do this? Is this still how you want me to? I handled it this way last time. Is this still the right way to handle it? I know what to do. I've got experience. And that's where we get into mistakes. Abraham knew what to do, go down to Egypt. but it didn't turn out to be the right thing to do. Fear leads to bad choices in our life. Fear gets us stressed. Fear leads us to make decisions we should not make. Notice in Genesis chapter number 12, verses 11 through 13. It came to pass when he was come near to enter into Egypt. So Abraham has his family, he has his servants, he has all of his livestock, he's getting close to Egypt, and now he starts thinking about this decision that he's making. Here's what happens. As he enters near to Egypt, that he said unto Sarah, his wife, Behold, now, I know that thou art a fair woman to look upon. What does that mean? He says, you're beautiful. Side note, she's about 65 years old, I think, at this time, roughly. So this is a little different than what you might would think, but notice what else he says. Because of your beauty, therefore, it shall come to pass when the Egyptians shall see thee, that they shall say, This is his wife, and they will kill me, but they will save thee alive. That sounds strange. We'll come back to it. He says, say, or this is what I want you to do. Say that you are my sister. Here's why. That it may be well with me for thy sake, and my soul shall live because of thee. Well, he just put some pressure on her, didn't he? Quick question. Don't get into a debate. Don't get into a discussion. Quick question. You can nod your head. You don't even have to answer out loud. Did Abraham lie? Some of y'all are not going to be sure how to answer this one. Yes and no. We got some yeses and we got some nos. Guess what? We'll find out later. She's his half-sister. She's his father's daughter. Now, this is long before that was what it is today. This wasn't a sin of incest. It was a part of culture and life at their day and time, way back before things changed. And before God gives these laws and rules that's not to be done. Just to clarify that. So what he does, he finds what we call a loophole, right? The loophole is, don't tell him you're my wife, just tell him you're my sister. A truth with the intent to deceive. That's a lie. He withheld part of information. People will say all the time, I didn't lie, I said this. With the intent to deceive, which the Bible interprets as a lie. Which God tells us not to do. Why do we do that? I'm not admitting I do that. I try not to do that. But I'm saying, why as humans do we do that? Why do we do it as Christians? Because it seems that telling this information in this way to deceive will get the result that protects us, and we justify it, don't we? Abraham rationalizes it. Tell them this so that I'll live. It's just rational. And by the way, if you're wondering why in the world he was fearful about that, because in their culture, oddly enough, he was right. If that was his wife, it was, I won't say super common, but it was common, and they've researched, they've read it, that people would kill him to take her as his wife, as their wife. But if it's his sister, they will negotiate and pay a dowry for her, which would buy Abraham some time to say, we got to get out of here, we got to do something different. So in his mind, he's thinking, if this situation happens where they're trying to come to take you, we'll have some time to do something about it. That's just if it comes up, but this will protect us. Is he walking by faith or by fear? By fear. And fear is leading him to make a bad decision, and he knows it's a bad decision because he's having to deceive, which he knows is not right. First red flag in your life, when you realize I'm having to rationalize this and I'm having to deceive someone, that's a place to stop and say, this is not the faith of Abraham I'm supposed to be following. This is the mistake of Abraham. And the mistake leads to bad choices. It's a defining moment in his life. He's going to have to decide now, I've come this far, but do I still trust God to protect me? This is what I know the people are like in this land. So if I do this, I might die. What he's leaving out is God's able to protect me if I trust him. And when we lose sight of that, we make bad decisions. When you find yourself wrestling with rationalizing a bad choice, hit the brakes. Ask God to help you not to do what you're about to do. It'll never work out right. He turns to Sarah and he says this to her, and he convinces her this is the right thing to do, and they do it. And so here we move to the next section. Technically, Sarah was his sister, but she was also his wife. He had just stepped out into trusting God, but it doesn't go well. And now we find that when he gets there, something he didn't expect mixed with something he did expect. They did see her, and they did think she was attractive, and someone does want her as a wife, or rather as a concubine. And it came to pass that when Abram was come into Egypt, the Egyptians beheld the woman, that she was very fair, very beautiful. The princes also of Pharaoh. This is going beyond the people that lived there. This is the royal court, and Pharaoh, the most powerful person in the land, his princes see her and say she would be a great addition to Pharaoh's harem. So they commend her before Pharaoh, and the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. What's happened? He's lost his wife. This is the woman, the only woman to whom which God said the promised seed would come. Jesus is coming through this seed. And Abraham just lost her to a pagan king. That should let us know how big of a mistake this was. Now, the only way this is going to be fixed is if God intervenes. But it also never would have happened if he would have trusted God to intervene. See, when we're in these places in life, we have to realize, let's don't make a mess and then ask God to fix it. Let's just trust God to start with so we don't make a mess. And now he's lost her, and if God doesn't intervene, he's lost his wife. The promise of the Messiah is going to come through here. The nation's going to come through her. Everything's lost if God doesn't intervene. Pharaoh entreated Abraham well for her sake, which means he paid a large dowry for her. He had sheep and oxen, asses, men servants, maid servants, and she asses and camels. And he's just, in one sense, the world might look at it and say, well, he saved his life and he's rich. But look at what he lost. See, a lot of times people make decisions for their family. This is what my family needs me to do. And it may look like material wealth in the moment, but often they lose their family through it all. They lose their family to sin. There's people that grow up and they start teaching their children about God, but they make decisions for their future. And what they leave out is God. And all of a sudden, God's not a part of their children's future anymore. It costs too much not to stay with God. As we move on in these verses, it says, and the Lord plagued Pharaoh. Here is the great step. God intervenes in this situation. Why? Because this was God's promise to take care of him. And even though Abraham messes it up, God intervenes. And I'm grateful, and I'm sure that you're grateful today, that when we mess up our life, we can still look and see that God steps in sometimes and says, you don't deserve me to fix this, but I'm here to fix it anyway. And God could have said, Abraham, you threw it all away. But he comes in and he says, Abraham, this will be a lesson for you. This is not written in the Bible. I'm just saying this will be a lesson to learn to walk by faith. Abraham, you had a step back, You did so well by faith, but then you let fear come in. And now I'm going to step in, I'm going to fix it. So he plagues Pharaoh's house with great plagues because of Sarah, Abram's wife. So before he has intercourse with her, before anything's messed up, God plagues him. And Pharaoh called Abram and said, what is this that thou hast done unto me? Why didst thou not tell me she was thy wife? Somehow, we're not told how, but somehow God reveals to Pharaoh, you're with another man's wife. And I'm plaguing you because of that. Until you make it right, these plagues are going to be here. And Pharaoh calls Abram into his council and he says, what have you done to me? Why didn't you tell me the truth? Why sayest thou, she is my sister? So I might have taken her to me to wife. Now therefore, behold thy wife, take her and go thy way. He now sends him away. And Pharaoh commanded his men concerning him, and they sent him away, and his wife and all that he had. They escort Abraham safely, but they escort him out of Egypt. Why? Because he had deceived them and brought plagues upon them. When did this happen? When he walked by fear and not by faith. His fears came, but if he had trusted God, everything would have been different. And notice one of the things that happens. You have it in your notes in verses 18 through 20. Abraham is rebuked by a pagan king. He is rebuked by a pagan king. Let's just get this picture in our mind of what's actually happened. Let me get it here. Abraham is meant to be, if you remember, the image of God. Abraham was supposed to show people where he went what God is like. And he's supposed to be protected by God and blessed by God. And in that protection and that blessing, others would look at him and say, your God's different than our God. And God said this to Abraham: I will bless those that bless you, curse those that curse you. And then what did he say? You will be anybody remember? A blessing. But Abraham failed to be a blessing to this people. He became a curse to them. And that is a picture of you and me and every Christian when we walk by fear and not by faith. When we deceive and we don't represent God. We bring not a blessing to other people, we jeopardize other people. And that's exactly what Abraham did. And Moses is trying to get the nation of Israel to see this mistake and recognize if you'll walk into this place in faith, if you'll walk by faith and trust God to take care of you, if you'll serve Him, you will be a blessing to this world. But if you don't, you'll be a curse to this world. So when you're scared and when you're afraid and when there's an issue in life, trust God. That's what He's trying to get them to do. The story is not just for us, it's immediately for the nation of Israel. And we're going to see that they're going to walk by fear at times. But for us today, we begin to look at things about what it's like for us to recognize walking by faith and not by fear. A couple of things I want us to do or look at before we close out today. A couple of lessons. Get this one. Here we go. If you go to the part that says lessons 1, God is faithful even when we fail. You know, I still think that's a great place for us to say amen. God is faithful even when we fail, right? Because we're going to fail. We don't get to plan our failures. Like, well, here's where I'm going to fail at. I'm going to go ahead and plan that because everyone's going to fail. So let me pick a good place for me to fail. No, we come to the place to recognize that fear is going to grip us sometimes. And we're going to make decisions that seem logical and rational. But the red flag is they're letting us know, 1, I might have to get out of church to do it. Or 1, I might have to be less faithful to God to do it. Or 1, I might have to tell a lie to do it. I may have to do something that the Bible forbids to do it. All of those are signs that says don't do it. Well, what if I don't? How will this work out? There's a God in heaven who's more than able to take care of you and me in every situation that we're in. Walking by faith goes, God, there's no way for me to do this or fix this unless I break your commandments. And so I will not break those commandments. I'm going to trust you and walk by faith. And I'm going to let you provide for me and you take care of these things. The second lesson, fear tempts us to take control, but faith waits on the Lord. What if Abraham just would have waited? You say, well, he was in a place where there was a famine. Let me ask this question, and we haven't read it yet. Well, we did they escort him back out of the land. In the next chapter, he's back in the land of Canaan, the place he left. Why did he leave? No. Why did he leave? The famine and fear. But he ends up right back at that place anyway. And God has to provide for him in that place. So if we just wait on God in the place where we are, we don't leave that place and get in a mess. It's better to trust God where we are with what we don't see than to do something on our own and make a bigger mess for ourselves, our family, and the people that's involved. Let's look at the next one. The Bible tells us, as we learn through these, deception may feel safer in the moment. We can agree to that. Deception may feel safer in the moment, but it damages trust, character, and our witness. Hey, maybe you don't want to tell your boss that thing that you need to tell your boss. Maybe you don't want to own up to the mistake. But by not doing it, you lose your testimony. And it's not just your testimony. You're a Christian. Every time you lose your testimony, you damage the testimony of Christianity, which is a reflection upon God. Being honest, being faithful. Deception feels safer at the moment, but trusting God is always the right choice. When we walk by sight, we create a mess that only God can clean up. Would y'all agree with that? Only God can fix these things that we mess up. And then we have to ask God to forgive us for making the mistake, forgive us for making the mess, forgive us for the people it affected. Hey, you know, in the long run, it's actually just easier to be obedient and faithful to God than to take things into our own hands. Walking by faith means not letting fear control our choices. Walking by faith means not letting fear control our choices. How do I know fear is controlling my choices? One, I'm trying desperately to fix a situation when I need to step back. As the Bible says, God told the Israelites, be still and know that I am God. Be still means to wait, to settle your heart, to be at peace, to stop. Instead of trying to fix the situation, wait on God. Walking by faith means not letting... How do I know it's fear? I'm trying to make a rash decision. A quick decision. Hey, you know, most decisions in life, you have more time to make, more time to sort through, more time to get information than most of us actually feel like at the moment. It's quick. Situation happens. We feel all the emotions inside, and what we do, we make a quick decision. With one of our law enforcement officers in our building today, I would dare say many of the people that he's had to arrest came because they made quick, rash decisions rather than thinking it out and going, you know what, if I had thought about this, I probably wouldn't have done what I just did. That happens a lot. You know. So let me ask you a question real quick. I'll try to lighten it just a moment. You're going down the road, and behind you, all of a sudden, there's these lights and this sound. You know what it is. Your heart sinks. What do? Police officers coming out behind you, sheriff's car, you're praying it's Chris, right? You're just praying it's Chris. So you can put him in a really awkward situation. What do? Do you slow down? Do you pull over? Yeah. But what do some people do? They panic and they do what? They hit the gas and they take off. And Chris smiles and says, this is going to be good. You know. Instead of a misdemeanor, now you've got this whole... It's a mess, right? Walking by faith means not letting fear control. Here's a couple affirmations I want to cover before we leave. I will walk by faith, trusting God to provide, even when fear tempts me to take control. Read these this week. Pray through these this week. I will walk by faith, trusting God to provide, even when fear tempts me to take control of the situation. I do not need to manipulate circumstances. God is faithful to protect and guide me. I don't have to manipulate the circumstances. I don't have to work this out. I can let God take care of this. When I am tempted to act out of fear, I will remember that God is present and his promises are sure. God will take care of me. I choose honesty and integrity, knowing that God honors truth even in hard situations. If you're here today and you're a parent, one of the things that you want your children to do is tell you the truth all the time, right? And you know that it's going to be hard sometimes. One, I'm telling you, my dad had some looks. He had some tones. He had a way of staring at you, and you just knew this is not good. And I also knew in that moment, you can't reason with him. Even if he misunderstood the situation, it's not going to go good. What would I be tempted to do? Let me manipulate the situation the best I can. But our parents always want us to tell the truth. Because in the end, the truth builds a relationship of trust and respect. And then, while I'm telling stories on my dad, let me just tell this one. My dad had a sister that when my grandmother would leave, she would grab okay, not a good story. She would chase him around with things that could ignite stuff. And he hid behind the curtains. You can imagine what happened. Ignited the curtains. The fire went out. My grandmother comes home. My grandmother was not a kind, gentle grandmother kind of person. They were all terrified to tell her what happened, and they all lied about it. My grandmother was smarter than I gave her credit for, and she sat down with one of them, and she said, "Did you set these on fire? I will not spank you for setting them on fire if you just tell me the truth." And she said, "Yes, Mama, I did it." And she pulled her up and wore her out. And she said, "Mama, you said you wouldn't spank me." She said, "I said I would not spank you for setting them on fire. I am beating you for lying to me." The truth is what God wants from us. And we do much better when we give him the truth. We give God the truth by giving each other the truth. One last one and we'll close. I will not protect myself through compromise. I will trust God to be my defender. If you'll look at these this week and pray through these, and there's a few others that you can go through here that help out. These are the things we need to use to make decisions in our life. They'll help us, guide us, and lead us. So we close today, let's bow our heads and remember, Abraham is the father of our faith. But we're not to follow his mistakes, we're to learn from them. And while we're closing right now, I want to ask you this question with no one looking around. What do you need to change this week? What steps do you need to take to line up with this? What deceptions do you need to stop rationalizing? And where do you need to walk by faith and say, "God, I do not know and I'm terrified. If you don't step in, I don't know how this will work. But I'm going to do this because I trust you to step in. Provide for me, my family. Protect us and lead us." Lord, today I pray that it would be all of our goal, our hope to walk by faith and not by fear. Thank you for letting us learn from Abraham's mistakes, and I pray that that's exactly what we'll do, to learn. So today, Lord, as we walk through these steps, I want to ask you to remind us this week to go through these affirmations, to go through these reminders, to build the kind of character and become the kind of